What am I going to talk about today? The role of customer experience in digital transformation. I think the first thing I'd like to say is a little bit about four things. My background to start with, then we'll get into the state of CX in the digital world as I see it, and then learnings from customer experience management in the digital space and how we can lead continuous improvement. I think first of all, if I may, I'll just kick off with a little bit about my background, just to ground this. So who am I and why am I talking about this? Subject matter expert on customer experience. I've been around this space for the last 15 years. Some details are on my website, allaboutexperience.co.uk. And on there, you also find some videos on new ways of measuring customer experience and frameworks, and also some portfolio work on customer experience projects in the Middle East. So on the quick 1-minute overview, if I was to give that of myself, I've had 15 years working agency, vendor, and client side. Within the digital space, working within Ericsson Managed Services on their platform to measure, monitor, analyze, and report on mobile signal and provision and look at services around that for operators. Working with T-Tech Digital, working in particular on the Fordpass project and with Tarmac, which is an organization in the UK dealing with road construction and other sort of construction projects. I've also been head of research and consulting at a number of boutique agencies, most recently working with Strativity and UAE on their Cadillac program. And now, for the last, coming up for a year and a half, I've been the customer experience lead within the Motor Insurance Bureau. And that's going to be particularly important here because what I'm leading in customer experience is something called the Whiplash Transformation Project, which is seeking to take out £1 billion worth of fraud from the UK economy and handling 20% of personal injury claims, moving from a legacy, if you like, analog system onto a digital self-serve platform. And as I give you more information about what we're trying to achieve in Motor Insurance Bureau, there's a great deal of complexity around that and how you fit a customer experience function into an agile build, working with product owners, BAs, and also an organization that previously dealt with insurance claims, using the language of talking about claimants rather than customers, never having to manage a self-service system before, and all the legal text that goes along with that. So it's a very important one that I'll use as a fundamental fulcrum for our discussion. Alongside that, other areas I've worked in, UX writer in particular at the moment. So and I think this is an underestimated function within any digital transformation and within the customer experience profession itself. How does the words on screen deliver a frictionless flowing experience for the customer going through, engaging and encouraging and making it to be as efficient and effective as possible? And there's a whole set of issues around that are not just about marketing issues, but deliver points of gain and points of pain to the customer. Because it's rather, in a digital transformation, it's rather like construction. If you're building a building, you can get the foundations right, but people aren't going to state that they're going to go and buy this house, for instance, just because the foundations are right and it stands up and the doors open. They'll do it based on what the interior design is, as well as fundamental things like location. And UX writing I see in customer experience is basically the interior designers for the digital build. I'm also an author of a book called Customer Experience Management Rebooted, and this is very much a signposting book to new ways of thinking about customer experience, because I believe the best thinkers of customer experience frequently come outside the profession. And I signpost particular frameworks that are of interest to me, narrative metrics, the use of Cynefin in there, and how it can apply in agile and digital builds. My previous work within customer experience has been cited by Forrester and worked with Avios. They were who won the UX Customer Experience World Awards, and also designed one of the first commercial emotion measurement systems with my friend Alpha Debay, who I know works in your and lives in your area as well. So that is a little bit of my background. I promise I won't provide too many slides on this, but in a nutshell, an experienced investigator, a UX writer, and I operate at the interface between design and build within a digital transformation. So what can I talk about today? I think the key thing is to ground it in what I know, which is customer experience management on the ground in a digital transformation of such a significant size and depth as the one I'm dealing with at the moment. I'm not a technical digital expert, so I'm afraid I'm not going to give you details about APIs, and you're going to catch me out if you ask questions about that as well. So I'm going to ground it in the customer experience management as a profession. What are the pains at the moment, and how can it operate more effectively within your digital transformations? Bearing in mind that you already have individuals dealing with user experience research, dealing with UI assets, bearing in mind you have comms operations already stating, well, we think about the customer anyway, so why do we need you? And I think positioning customer experience in that environment is fundamental and critical for the reasons I've explained before. Okay, first section then is just on the state of customer experience in the digital world. And I think if we were going to talk drivers to why even bother with customer experience management, this is a little bit obvious, but it's worth positioning it within digital. I think keeping up with expectations, if you're building, particularly in the world I live in, for claims to move from what was previously you have an insurer doing it for you to now self-serve, there's a whole set of needs, wants, and expectations that you must manage to make sure that your customer delivers or gets what they need to do. So it's not about loyalty. It's about maintaining that there's no leaky bucket in the claims environment. It's about maintaining satisfaction, and it's about maintaining effectiveness of operations. So when a customer walks through the experience of a claim in this particular case, they are engaged, they understand legal text, and they follow through. In a different world, I think outside claims, by the way, I think loyalty absolutely comes to mind. I gave you the earlier example of Cadillac, which very much was a brand-driven program in customer experience where loyalty and brand image is absolutely effective. Slightly lesser in the case of claims industry, although we do want to engender that trust is probably the better word I'd state here. Trust in that particular case, where the world I deal with is around making sure that it's seen as a trusted program, that it's seen as one backed by the Ministry of Justice in the UK, particularly in the industry we're dealing with, which is rife with fraud. So I've spoken about expectations. I've spoken about the important driver around effectiveness, also the double whammy of being efficient and driving satisfaction at the same time. If we can use customer experience to get our build right in our digital transformation, if we're thinking customer first as we build this, or at least co-thinking customer and business first as we build it, we're most likely to deliver the most efficiency benefits for our program. And we're most likely to reduce those dropouts in claims and effectively churn and raise satisfaction at the same time. To achieve that, I think needs to be a fundamental shift in how digital transformation teams work. Not so much thinking about the analog, how does the website function, but what is the end-to-end customer journey that within this, as they use and wraps around this, what are their needs, wants, and expectations, and critically also from a delivery point of view, from the employee side, what does this mean for our operatives in handling this new customer? In the claims world, this means before, as we move to self-serve, we're having to get a whole shed load of inquiries from customers that are more complex than those sort that we had to deal with before. We're having to open up new channels as well than what we dealt with before. And critically, we're having to learn how we need to operate and think journey-wise and what is going through the head of the customer as they try and self-serve these new complexities. So there's a whole set of challenges involved in moving to this world, new journey, new expectations, new delivery models, and new ways of operating inside the organization. As you can see, in some ways, digital transformation is really just about the motherhood and apple pie of customer experience profession as a whole. So the next slide just outlines some of the examples to illustrate what I've just raised. And when I spoke about digital transformation, I would like to change it then to really what we should call it is the omni-channel world. The omni-channel customer sensitive transformation challenge is what it should be. Omni-channel in the sense that digital does not sit in isolation. You have contact center operations, you have paper-based forms and applications. For instance, you have different types of people you're dealing with as well. Those who cannot use digital, the vulnerable customer, and the people who are just simply uncomfortable with the digital environment, who phone up and want to get you to help them work through the portal, which makes it omni-channel, not just digital. Customer sensitive in the sense that I don't believe customer centricity should be the diktat within the firm. It's always a negotiation around the business KPIs you want to drive. And what you're trying to achieve is not necessarily customer obsession with your stakeholders you're dealing with, but in everything they do, customer empathy, customer sensitivity. So they almost have permission to consider the customer in their build. So when they're looking to put together a password through, let's say, an Okta portal or other form, they're not thinking of eight reams of bullet points that confuse the customer and create 100% dropout. They're thinking naturally, when we build this, what would work for the customer? And that's really a space you want to get to. And I don't think you get to that space by too much talk about driving NPS scores or customer obsession. It has to be a negotiation, and you have to be a strong voice within that negotiation, my point of view. So customer experience management then, how does it operate in some of these examples I'm going to give? I'll give you 6 just very brief examples of this. I've mentioned sort of MIB and self-serve. My role there is to really position customers, something to think about within the build teams. Within, sorry, I'm just getting a question. Is that right, Mohammed? Just getting some feedback there. Are we okay? Okay. Within other areas, such as Avios that I've worked on, that was been a straight tech transfer, so not self-serve in that case, but a build between Iberia Airlines and BA that took a year to put up. And you can imagine the difficulties that arose from that. So customer experience management in that case was really cleaning up the issues of a fast build. So for instance, needs, wants, and expectations of the customer around wanting to book on page 1, the flight map was down on page 3, emails being sent out were not promoting the destinations, those kind of things. Other examples here, AXS, which is a different driver to their digital transformation in terms of sales effectiveness and how well that is built and positioned for the customer. And I'll give you an example of that in terms of some of the lean customer tests we did in a few slides down. Tarmac, their digital transformation was very much around better efficiency. So moving in their particular case, their contact center operations closer together, a better CRM system to deliver faster reference numbers to the customers on the phone to prevent them waiting, but also had some challenges around it. In that particular case where you do not think customer, you can over-digitalize, if you like. So trucks come to a concrete plant, invoices are delivered electronically by ePod, not thinking about the use of paper-based invoices before, where the customer used to write on it to deliver notes to their purchasing team. If you don't think customer first, then you create these points of friction in your digital experience. Fordpass is another example where this was opening up into a new market in their digital transformation. Customer experience in that particular case was around what services we can provision on the Fordpass app and how best to move that forward going into Europe in that particular case, rather than taking off-the-shelf model from the USA. And in Ericsson's case, very much about the connected car, the connected home, and in my particular case, looking at how we can take digital analytics platforms to measure mobile signal and make them tailored for the operators. So there's various 6 different types of customer challenge faced with a digital transformation, moving to a new customer journey with self-serve, the technical transfer without thinking about the customer when it should have done, sales effectiveness, efficiency in operations, entering a new market and differentiating for operators around big data, that all require, I'd suggest, a strong customer experience hand in whatever build they design. Otherwise, you do create these points of friction that delivers ineffectiveness in digital transfer. Okay. Wrap that up in a statement. If you have the customer in mind from the start, it would cost you less money and you'd have a better chance to differentiate on the basis of customer experience, which means in all these digital transformation challenges, you need a customer experience management function to keep you true and real to the needs, wants, and expectations of the customer from the start through to the end. Difficulty is, of course, that sound fairly straightforward, common sense, is governance and compliance. Where does the customer experience management function fit in any of these builds, and what budget do they hold? Okay. In the medical industry, I've also worked on some of the clinical trial models within TTEC. This is an example of one where we were essentially looking at what does digital technology offer when we're faced with the KPI problem of dropout from clinical trials and also not being so fixed to the local area where the clinical trial occurs for patients. And this is all comes into the use of digital to reach out beyond the local area, the use of digital to encourage patients to stay with the program of clinical trials. And you can see some examples here. What we were looking at was delivering curated content, clinical trial partners, collaborative coaching communities, and so forth. It enables access to knowledge and expert communities of interest to create stickiness in the clinical trial, as well as giving greater scope to increase the regionality of where we can gain patients. I gave you the example earlier of Ericsson and their digital transformation, looking at big data and mobile data, where obviously the operators are making their money as voice revenues go down. What's the role of customer experience there? Well, it's very much looking at base station where they are sited and what analytics we can perform to make them most efficient. And this is looking at the customer journey from a big data analytics point of view. And we can see from the simple example of a day in the life where we can route and monitor where each individual goes, where they check data, and the efficiencies of base stations within that environment, and where there is lag on video downstreaming. So we can help reduce that lag, and it's also obviously monetize that clearly as well. So I'm getting a bit of feedback. Is that a question? So these are, again, giving some flavor for digital transformation and the various route ways that the customer experience management function come in. In actual fact, in Ericsson's case, we also used this to tailor the systems worldwide against operators for their individual circumstance. So what is the big data? What's it showing in terms of base station functionality? What data can we bring in? And also, how can we engage and encourage field engineers in the back office to start thinking customer? And in that particular case, it was making and designing our own customer experience index and also getting a feed into the field engineers' systems so they could see the kind of stories that were being shared on social media on the mobile signal. So you can see There's front office work to do in terms of looking at the customer journey from a big data analytics point of view, to tailor it, to make it most efficient, look for those opportunities, but also a back office view of cultural engagement for field engineers. And another critical thing is, which is also true in other areas, are you reporting the impact on the customer for any friction points that you encounter? The field engineers in this particular case were reporting base station down, but not the impact on the customer, how many, and the impact on revenues that accrue. These are the kind of things you can do with customer experience. You can also segment your data to see who are the VIP customers and work your way through their journey. So that gives you a flavor from the world of Ericsson. So benefits of a well-managed journey. Really, we can see all these various links from Harvard, McKinsey, Forbes, White House Office of Consumer Affairs. Don't think I need to necessarily go through them, but hopefully it illustrates the business case for you. We're not talking pink and fluffy. We're talking about business effectiveness and efficiency, and also looking for opportunity that can only accrue when you have a strong customer experience management voice in your organization. Some of the things I've seen in customer experience as a function and some of the failure points, hopefully now that I've given you the business case for having a customer experience management function. Some of the terms I've seen used are where NPS being used, being called a non-predictive system. Now, I happen to be fairly neutral about NPS, but I'm just some of the insights, feedback I have had from large organizations of that, or it's very marketing orientated. It's been called pink and fluffy, or if it's very focused just on coaching, some of the work I've heard is this material doesn't work, it's too top down, it's too dictatorial, it's just there to satisfy the C-suite, and why should we even have you in the room because we know who our customers are? Those are the kind of challenges that come back to a customer experience management function on the ground, as well as the implicit one, who are you? What role do you perform? Because typically customer management tends to be a floating role, not really being owned by comms, not really being owned by operations, certainly not necessarily being owned by IT, who may bring their own UI person in. So this is the challenge we face. And I've seen it not just in digital transformation, but also in the energy industry and other areas where there's been an immaturity in the compliance and governance frameworks that apply around customer experience. That means that it cannot stick and cannot see the value for the organization. And for me, this is the number one problem with customer experience. Because if you believe and accept the business case that I've just stated to you with those examples as being beneficial to you, if you have an incomplete frameworks that you apply around customer experience, then you will have limited benefits that accrue because you will not have one or several individuals there as the voice of the customer to keep you true and fair. So some of the things I would say is lack of compliance and governance, a failure, which we'll go through, and some solutions. Incomplete frameworks about embedding language. And again, this very much in all this case applies in digital transformations. Sometimes the product owners have maybe failed to show the value that they themselves, because customer experience is new, are unaware of it and unaware of the benefits. Again, that we know who our customers are, challenge back to you. Sometimes the poor utility of journey maps and personas, journey maps that fit on the wall and look nice, but don't actually seem to be delivering value. A lack of a design-led approach. You as customer experience management on the ground in a utility that I was working with, crew, you have no money, create your own business case, but we're only interested in reducing costs. Very top-down. The danger of that is while you need top-down to tick the box, these things are ruthlessly gamed within the organization. Saying you're going to focus on the customer, trust, or we want to be the most loved company is just words on the page. Inadequate voice of the customer that I focus on very strongly in considering best practice metrics. While I'm comfortable with NPS, I think there sometimes tends to be too much of a focus on one metric and not enough focus on what we should do. Tends to be a simplified view of customer experience as well. It's all about ease. Let's just focus on that. And sometimes with the background of customer experience, people just see it's been a polluted pond and just heard too much of it's a nice to have, it's about delight, or so on and so forth. So those, I'm just saying some of the challenges that I've heard and some of the language on the right-hand side and some of the difficulties I see in terms of framework application in customer experience on the left. And the key thing here is what can we do about it? And as it relates to digital. So let's now move into some practical reality of learnings from the CX management in the digital space. But before I get there, I'll just stop. Mohammed, I know you can see if there's any questions. Happy to progress, but we've been about 20 minutes in. Any key points at this point or questions you have to raise, please unmute and state, or I'll progress. I'll just wait for 10, 20 seconds. If anybody has to say anything, or are we good? I'm assuming the silence means we're good. So I will progress. Mohammed, I know you're online, or Kim, if there's any shout out or hands raised, just feel free to unmute. I'm very happy to stop at that point and take your questions. Okay. Now I'm going to look at some of the learnings from the digital space. Let me just have a look if there's any. Okay, good, we're all good. So first of all, what does customer experience management mean on the ground? Particularly when you're working within what most organizations are about, which is low in the understanding of customer experience, very immature. You may be the first customer experience management function to be set up. I think the first thing, actually, to be honest with you, having worked in very engineering-focused organizations where customer first is not the natural thing for people to think, is you do have a lot of implicit support. I would say 80% of the people within an organization as hard-nosed engineering as Ericsson were very comfortable, very clever, and supported the view. And again, it comes back to my point. I don't think it's necessarily so much people as against the frameworks that they're dealing with and seeing the value of you. And I think the first thing is, and the danger is, when you're seeking to set up a customer experience management function in a digital transformation, you need to avoid the white blood cell reaction. What I mean by that is you're an alien, essentially, in customer experience management, coming into an environment, often months down the line in the digital build, where the language has been speaking agile language about defects and enhancements, about product functionality, not customer intimacy, where they have worked their system and their language, and they naturally think they know the customer from a legacy base of 20 or 30 years, maybe 20 years in some people's cases, thinking and dealing with claimants. And you come in telling me that you know about the customer more than I do. And you really want to try and avoid that. And which is why it comes back to my early point that you need to work with the agile or design, service design level functions that you have, in my particular case, agile, driven off a vendor, to find your positioning within that, and also know where you sit within the organization. Because it's no good saying, I'm going to act as the customer, you be your advocate, and triage issues through you and create a better customer experience if you have no bind within the organization. You're just there to free float around or seen as part of, say, a communications function only dealing with brand. That kind of activity is not going to deliver value. You are just going to be rejected and sent out. Okay. I think the second thing about an on-the-ground customer experience management function in digital transformation is to be really clear with your stakeholders about why you are there. What does customer experience management stand for in this organization? You are essentially the customer advocate. And I think that's most important because customer experience, the term, is fairly ambiguous. So you need to state really what your function is. You're not here to aggregate data in support of insights and draw up charts of data. You're not here to push an API or some other product. You're here as the customer advocate. And if that's clear, what you do find is your very presence gives permission for other stakeholders to start talking customer. What I have found is being present in the room at stand-ups and pushing back has enabled others in the room to start saying, yeah, we think that. We would like X, Y, Z. When we go through and build our flows, we're thinking about the way things are written, and we understand that has positive value back for the effectiveness even of a minimal viable proposition build. Because if it's effective and efficient for the customer, it'll be effective and efficient for us. These are very practical considerations on the ground. And I think getting down to grassroots and ground level, how you operate customer experience, is more important now as a business area than talking grand talk. However, saying that, you are the customer experience advocate. I do like the model on the right-hand side, that I'm sure you're aware of already, that again positions it well for your stakeholders. That yes, in traditional terms, product owners are focused on product leadership, and PMs likewise, alongside operational excellence. Your area is that limb to the right in terms of building in customer intimacy, which has the double whammy effect of benefit product leadership and benefit operational excellence. So I tend to use what's called the Tracy and Visima model when I talk about customer experience. When I come to your organization, who am I? Why am I here? Okay. Clearly, there's a criticality as well to wrap yourself around the key KPIs that your business is interested in. In my world, it's reduced days in the claims life cycle, from 300 to 60 or whatever it might be. It's also reduced claims dropout. These are very clearly hard measures, but there's also a balance between the hard measure and the soft measure. In my world, it's treat customers fairly. That's a standard measure applied by our industry in the insurance. It may be something entirely different in other businesses, whether it's customer satisfaction, net promoter score, or customer net easy score, or anything you like. There's always a balance between the hard metrics and the soft metrics that you apply. I see it as a bundle of KPIs wrapped around your corporate objectives, absolutely not one measure. I also see that the key KPIs for your business are also linking into quality assurance in the contact center and total quality management from the customer's point of view. And in some ways, when we're talking grandly about customer experience, I almost push back at, we got your business KPIs that we're seeking to achieve, but we really need to understand what the customer experience is that we're focusing on before we can actually say what we need to measure around it, which requires good knowledge, whether it's through A/B testing, UX research, narrative feeds, and so on and so forth. Okay. Also, in terms of what we're looking at here, governance, ensure that customer experience management is in the target operating model. This is an example from Tarmac, a very simple example of how we're looking for frictionless experience between Tarmac and customers through omni-channel environments of, yes, self-serve and all the activity that combine with that, but also better customer engagement from the agents, account representatives, so the two channels that interface with purchasers of aggregate and so forth, as well as the Marcom side. And that has significant implications, of course, for what technology you can provision. I already mentioned this particular case. If we start outside in, we can identify moments of pain. We can see, for instance, the need for a new CRM system because of the delays in this particular case of delivering invoice numbers to customers on the phone, and so on and so forth. Or we could look for opportunity-seeking behavior by informing and sharing and creating the account representative model to be more about consultative sales. Make sure customer experience management is in the target operating model. The Next one around governance in customer experience management is clearly define a position for the function within your agile team. So with an agile build, where I see myself in the standard model is as a business advisor. So it's not the team leader and the project management functions are pulling in various stakeholders that you should be seen as key and fundamental as part of the infrastructure in the solutions design and development role. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm hearing some feedback. Is there a question at this point? Or are we good? Okay, I think we're good. So defining a position within any team is critical. In my particular case, I've taken on board quite a lot of the content authorship, seeing where the gap is within the customer experience function, not necessarily filled with user experience, and then taking on board the authorship and how we can make sure we reduce the pain points and understanding the journey the claimant goes through when they fill out forms for their motor for their claims insurance on a motor injury accident. Okay, so in short then, what we've looked at, if we go back slightly around governance, was we looked at make sure that people are on board with who you are in customer experience management on the ground in your digital build. Don't leave the customer experience management to free float. Tell the team what it stands for and why it's there. Make sure it has significant business value by wrapping around what's important for the business. Make sure it's seen within your governance model, within your target operating model, or in risk registers, and define it within your build teams. Otherwise, customer experience, before you know it, you'll be on sprint 50 or whatever it is, and customer experience have lagged behind, and whatever you build, going back to the early point, will be a shell of a building without the interior design, and the customers, when they buy a house, will always look for the interior design. I think another thing is there can be a little bit of clash with the UI and UX function within your build teams within digital. And I think you also need to be clear about what the purpose is of customer experience against what the vendor and others will naturally bring to the table, because there could be seen something of a clash there. For me, I see CX as the same as UX. A customer is a user. The only difference is delimited by the journeys that you apply. Not quite how the business world sees it, the way I see it. I think what I see practically on the ground is your UX experts focusing on asset management in terms of your user interface, the UI design. The UX experts being focused very much on the immediacy of the screen-based experience, engaging in insights, so UX research, I'm a great fan of, but also themselves being the customer advocate. I think some key differences at the moment are, of course, in the role of CX management being more of a governance type framework, triaging insights from wherever they may land, being the voice of the customer, integrating end-to-end journey flow beyond just the experience of use, which the UX expert focus on. To give you an example, which I gave earlier, it's also not just about the screen experience, it's about the contact center operations experience, it's about the paper-based applications experience, more holistic interpretation, and also, of course, acting as a CX advocate. Very much the two operate close together. Okay, so that's governance, and hopefully now that's clear, the learnings from CX management there around digital transformation, or making it clear. And I think particularly within digital, where stakeholders tend to focus by nature of their jobs on product functionality, it is a very important role. Otherwise, you will build a house without the interior design. The second learning about customer experience management in the digital space I'd like to go through is around asset management. So what assets, now we've positioned customer experience management as a function, what assets should they and do they control? And I'll be going through about 7 of these, as you can see here, how they embed and engage with the insights team, what insights you can use, how you construct journeys, how those and how you integrate with process maps, because there's often been a lot of confusion. We do customer journey maps, we have our process maps, has often been the retort back to the customer experience management function. They're not one and the same thing. How you co-create and how you bring other stakeholders into digital transformation, what you can do on the fly, lean customer tests, don't all have to be A/B testing, how you manage the funnel of ideation as a key KPI, and as I mentioned before, a key and underappreciated role of the UX writer. I see all these as sitting because they all focus on what is the vision, what's it like to walk in the customer's shoes, and that is the ownership of assets around the customer experience manager. I'm going to give you just a few screenshots. This is an example of the program I set up with Zen in the UK, a telecommunications provider. I'm very much focused on don't take the inside only view of the customer. It's very easy to get 50 people or 20 people in a room from around your organization to come up with what they think is the customer experience, which is a waste, or not a waste of time, but can lead you down the wrong direction. When we did that, we sometimes find, for instance, we think what's most important is getting the invoices out to the customer quickly because we get money in quickly. Those are the kind of responses if you have an inside-only view of journey mapping. I tend to do journey mapping in a different way, which I'll show you, but certainly it needs to be that combination as a CX management function of understanding where the business head is at. So in point one, what interviewing stakeholders, what existing surveys have we collated, through to the normal process of getting great customer insights, walking the experience, journey mapping with customers, co-creating with focus groups, and then your usual analytics processes that we've seen before using big data and other presenters have spoken about in earlier presentations. We all know that. What I'm saying is it should be your customer experience management, making sure that the insights function works well and triaging those insights with you as a fulcrum between insights and design. That's where I see a critical role, turning insights into actionability on the ground. And I include in that qualitative work, most especially. There's limited, with any of these techniques, there's a limited amount you get from quant. It's a blunt instrument, particularly in UX. You can get a considerable amount from focusing on a few user experience interviews with your customers. Okay. In terms of one question here, walking the experience. What does walking experience mean? Perhaps I didn't explain it well. It's putting yourself in the shoes of a customer and going end to end. It's a critical function to do both yourself, which is often not stated, so you get empathy for the customer and understand through common sense what you could do, but also to walk the experience either through certain testing with customers. For instance, we asked customers out in the real world to test our claim applications process, not in the lab, but end to end, giving various scenarios. Because the more realistic you can get it, the more you can pick up new, challenge yourself, and new pieces of information that you would not have seen or been aware of before in a lab or environment or through surveys. So I'm just getting another one. I don't think it's a waste of time to walk the experience yourself at all. I think what you can get, though, is you're bootstrapping yourself into being the customer to come up with hypotheses that you can then test if you need to. And also critically looking for opportunities that you could design better. Customers only know necessarily what they know from their own world, and I'll give you an example of that down the line when I show you an example with AXS, and not necessarily see the whole opportunity. So I do say it's part of the mix, but walking the customer experience is also needs to make it real as well, real insights from customers. I think there's also the question here, how does walking the experience and making assumptions on behalf of the customer relate to actual VOC data? It's an adjunct to it, an addition. I don't know how your actual VOC data works. I think sometimes what I've seen is we have been too focused on measurement charts on NPS scores, not enough on the real voice of the customer. And my favorite activity there is to unpick and know what the voice of that is through narrative data. Some of the tools that we've seen before in previous presentations have talked about text analytics. In other spaces I've seen get narrative from the customer and also let the customer self-quantify their own narrative and say what's important for them or not. And I think all this comes part of the mix. I do not think there is one way to run insights. I think it's a mix of all. To give you an example of that, 60% of the ideas we came up with one telecommunications provider were gleaned not from analytics of voice of the customer or big data, but through co-creation workshops. So it's a mix of activities that I think you need to perform, but what you do need in any of those inputs is the ability to triage those and bring the voice of the business into the voice of the customer. Okay. Which brings me on to other asset within customer experience, which is around how you construct journey maps. So own the insights, triage, turning insights into action, and making that works well with a variety of techniques as a customer experience management function. And give you an example of that, UX research was the best and most important thing we did as a customer experience management function in a digital build. Also, business benefits from journey maps need to be made more apparent. What do I mean by this? I mentioned earlier that we created journey maps that sat on a wall. Journey maps must have utility, and journey maps must give you the benefits of automation opportunities, frequently seen from the employee experience side as well. Journey maps must also enable you to be rolled up into business case preparation for any triage that you're going to perform. Okay. Journey maps must also highlight where we are going to put our voice of the customer measures, or we're going to be putting our data in analytics. So this is the kind of thing I'm saying about your journey maps do not deliver utility, but are just delivering a generalized view of the customer experience. They're not going to help your build teams, and they're not going to help your triaging going forward. Too many journey maps I've seen that literally, very much, as with personas, sit on the wall. Okay. One way I've approached the creation of journey maps is to, I spoke earlier about bringing in insights data and walking the experience. In one particular case, what I did was also make it more emergent. So what data do we have? We had a large number of verbatims from surveys, 1,062 key verbatims from surveys released over the last 3 years with an internet telecoms provider. We used that, mined it from the verbatims people were providing to come up with the journey bottom up like that. And then we had also done an employee map as well, so we could make a comparison between the two and what is the sense and where is the sense customers are naturally talking about the experience through surveys that are different from what we came up with. And that came up with what we called the common journey. And this emphasized more in this particular case the importance of brand and expectations of essentially a new player in the market that wasn't pushing its unique selling point hard enough or well enough to the customer audience. In this particular case, its management of mobile signal was far superior to those standard players who are pushing price reduction. The business itself had focused in a different area of the market when they looked at their business from an inside-out point of view. And while they were correct to manage to price expectations, they were underplaying the importance of the fact of their great stellar customer service and also their ability to manage the mobile signal better than any other provider. That's a business challenge and a strategic challenge, which direction they should go, but it's highlighting the USPs that they were underplaying in how they can perform. I do have a question about employee map. It's a great point to bring this in. because employees, one of the things I think people make the mistake of is thinking if we do an employee map, it's to the benefit of the employees and therefore it sits as an HR function. It is not. Every employee benefit has a customer experience benefit. So in the claims world, some of the best insights I got was what can the experience of a claims handler of the claims process, because we found issues such as empty assignment key, such as manual processing that was taking time of the claims handler. When you ask the claims handler how many claims they handle in a day, it may be 100. If you took out these issues, how many it could handle a day, it'd be 120, which has a knock-on effect to the customer experience. So now rather than having let's imagine a 75-day average handling time for a particular claim, it now reduces to 73 because we have more efficient process from the employee end. So employee maps also come in to customer experience, and you should apply those, understand those, and triage those through when you're looking to transform customer experience on the ground. And remember this as well, employees, by going through that process, also get the vision of what you're trying to perform as the customer advocate. And within a digital transformation, because it hits an omni-channel world, because it hits contact center operations, because agents now have to perform new functions they didn't, and more complex functions they did not have to perform before. Now they need that mindset of think customer. Otherwise, customers are going to depend on them on the phone, frequently vulnerable customers, and they're not going to get the service that they require to maintain their engagement within a self-serve world. That's the kind of thing. So employee maps, absolutely fundamental. Work with your employees in the same way to triage insights, your role, target operating model, business benefits to the customer, employee benefits frequently leads to customer experience benefits, the same thing. Okay. I think there's another fundamental thing about journey maps to make them customer journey maps must have utility. And is when you are dealing with your agile teams or your design teams around the digital build, it can frequently get out of control. Soon you have build of 200, 300, 400, 500 screens if you're not careful, and with lots of text running all over the place. And I think being able to integrate what you see through the screens as quality of experience and having that infrastructure against what they do look at, the process map flows, is a key benefit that should be provided by customer experience management. So for instance, not just stick journey maps on the wall. When let's imagine start claim had password, when we had click here for password, which it typically says in the process map, you also at the top level see the screen that you're applying. And what you do by that is you don't just see the functional activity and its associated SLAs as a build, you're actually seeing the quality of experience that it relates to. And if you do that, you can see click password is not just about a functional spec, it's also about a quality spec. And this is a classic failure point with digital builds where password may be 8 lines long, people don't understand it, there's 100% dropout. You can see that if you can see the screens. So what you're doing by combining the two, journey flows with screens across process maps, is you're doing several things. You're getting the language of customer experience embedded within your agile teams, within your BAs, your POs, your project managers, etc., your solution design architects. But you can also use that for training. So your contact center operatives can take this, they're trained in understanding the process management flows because they have to know where breakpoints are, but they also engage in what is the experience of the customer at any particular point. Can I see this? And screens speak more about the customer experience than a process map flow. At the moment, they tend to lie separate. So the learning is there. Make sure your screen flow is well managed and is integrated and used, because that's the simplest way to get language of the experience into your build teams. I think we mentioned enough about employee experience, a great source of CX ideas, so I'll skip that slide. I think another great source is engage a customer council. If you haven't thought this, and again, there's an ongoing theme here. If I was to put a one-sider about what customer experience management is, I'd probably draw it in a funnel, because that's what it essentially is. It's triaging insights from whatever source to make yourself more focused in the customer where relevant in what you build and what you do. Another great source is, as I say, in E.ON, for instance, they built a customer council of key stakeholders. E.ON is a utility company in the UK. Those were focused and targeted on redesigning the electricity and utility bills of customers and making sure that it was a one-pager. Then MIB, looking at a similar process. I ran customer councils as well, where we get practitioners together, and they often also have the side benefit of not just talking about what you could do and imparting best practice from other organizations, but also just giving confidence that customer experience is the way forward for your business. Confidence is a very important thing for customer experience management, particularly facing a hostile business that doesn't see your role or you're new to it and can't see what the purpose and benefit is. So I've run these, for instance, with John Lewis, a retail organization in the UK, as well as with Overbury, a construction company focused on customer experience in the UK. And these are the kind of the outputs we get. And I think with E.ON and other examples, that third-party view is another great source of ideas. DHL ran exactly these. They run in their Customer for Life program, 50 innovation workshops from around the business for exactly this purpose. I spoke earlier about walk the experience, and I know there are a number of questions around how best to do this. I think the key thing I want to impart is if your time is short, do it yourself. I know it's not strict to form in a research perspective, but you can get great insights, common sense insights that you can triage and discuss just by spending a day or some in your time walking the experience to look up common sense things. How much data do you need if, for instance, app failure on the bottom there with walking the experience AXS, the ticket provider, creates call center volumes? If the Google ads do not deliver results for AXS, it's the out of hours timing is inconsiderate. These are kind of things, or you get bad reviews or poor content and limited information. These are kind of things that don't need, you can easily pick up through doing it yourself, and you don't need anything more than common sense to say, wouldn't it be a good idea if we change this? And this is something also very much applicable to when we're writing screens, that UX writing that I earlier mentioned. A lot of it is common sense. A lot of it you can do off the pat, as long as you have that customer-focused mindset. I mentioned earlier about AXS, about opportunity finding. You can see on the bottom layer here, based on one day walking the experience of buying AXS tickets with one individual, we can look and say, you know, there's limited UI on StubHub, as you can see here on the upper circle, Royal Circle and stalls. That particular case was what they showed when you bought a ticket. That is not engaging and effective enough to bring customers in to the ticket buying experience. So it's these kind of things you can start to discuss. The question here of getting trapped into segment sample of one, no, because this is just, I would say, first of all, doesn't stand alone, but also I'm very strong in terms of believing there's a lot of common sense in an organization, bringing that voice of the business again for these common sense themes. We do not need quantitative data all the time to do great customer experience. We do not hang ourselves on measurementizers, on saying what are the drivers in a quantitative fashion all the time to an NPS score. While they do have value and validity in certain consequences, we would not do UX research, period, with a sample of 5 to 8 in research labs if we followed that paradigm. So I do say there's a mixed approach. There's a space for quantification, of course. There's a space for your churn models, of course. There's also a very strong space for good, effective, qualitative information, so long as you have the voice of the business and experts to triage that through. Okay, I think that's a really important point. And I think that one of the best examples I give of that, just to illustrate that, is law. The law, at least in the UK, give that example, is every single court case has 12 people who decide the case. If you just depended it on precedent and some quantitative basis, you'd never get anywhere. So there's absolutely a fundamental place for common sense, triage, and qualitative information. I think your best KPI then, which is what I'm leading up to, is your funnel. It comes back to this point about a little bit of a bugbear I have with customer experience. There's a lot of, it's almost like, well, customer experience is a pretty ambiguous term. Tell me what the customer experience is, and I'll tell you what to measure. Sometimes with Avios, for instance, we are looking at Facebook likes that didn't have a pull on satisfaction rates, but still part of the overall mix to influence customer satisfaction scores down the line, but more importantly, how that related to customer lifetime value, the hard measure. Smaller things aggregated together. So it's not easy to say one measure is your customer experience, but what is better, I think, is to flip it. Rather than say, we have that metric devises this activity, what is the customer experience in the first place we wish to look at and change, and then define the measure? And for me, that feeds into good insights process, into good actionability through a good triage process, which, as we've seen before, fits exactly with the triage model that's worked within digital transformation and in service design. The problems come, of course, again, back to governance and compliance, that people cannot see what customer experience management is there for and cannot see the benefits. So this is the way I look at it. Let's show me the customer experience that you want to define. Let's show you the measure, of course, being wrapped around the KPIs you want to. Churn reduction, we're all aware of that. Churn reduction, claims handling, the claims, managing an increased volume of claims, we all know that. But I think where people fall down is getting hung up on not what you do, but what the measure is from an abstracted higher level, okay? And while that's not entirely wrong, I think it's better, again, for customer experience more grounded on what you do. So if I walked into a customer experience management function, I'd like to know how you are triaging. It's not necessarily a unique point. Jean Bliss, in some of her videos, if you've seen that, talks about customer experience, again, being this triage infrastructure. She used the term the duct tape. Exactly the same point. And being that subject matter expert and advisor, and being the duct tape and holding these different groups together feels like a natural place for customer experience to be in. So I kind of like Kim's comment there. It's about the horse leading the cart, not the cart in front of the horse. We could kind of look at it like that if you like, but of course it does lead down to how well you manage that triage function and being positioned. So again, building on digital, you have brand and marketing, you have operations, you have your IT build, you have HR, and you have POs, BAs, and PMs engaged in that. So where you sit becomes really important. For myself, I currently sit within communications, and that is not a problem. Prior to that, I sat within operations, but please sit somewhere. Please also make sure that the processes and assets you control have that governance and compliance around it, so we can execute our roles to deliver insights into actionability. And I would also like to mention another key function is the role of the UX writer in digital. I mentioned it a lot, but I think an individual word can be a moment of pain. Design should wrap itself around and with content authorship. In my particular case, where we're the first time that the public has to run their own legal affairs to a certain extent, complex legal words need to be expressed correctly up to readability age 11, otherwise they may lead to failure, as an example. So I think another thing that's a hidden thing that I think is underestimated with the CX management function and falls between CX and UX is the writer and content authorship. So if you're in comms, UX writing becomes fundamental. How the words of the screen look are your interior design of your house and how people flow through your digital and engage with you digitally. Okay, so next one is we're getting to culture. We've seen CX must be seen as important. So we've been through governance, we've been through assets, we've been now what is customer experience management culture. saying all that I've said about grassroots support. At the end of the day, if your project managers or your top level audience they deal with is not taking you seriously or not using the right language, it's not going to get anywhere. So you need to come from the bottom, absolutely, but also from the top. So there is a place for what I'd said earlier about the Cadillac Big Bang Wow events. There is a place for brand and marketing to pushing the message as Customer for Life did. There is absolutely that need to demonstrate to the business that this is the direction we want to go, but it in itself is not the answer. That comes much more at the grassroots level. This is a more complex point, but I think also important. In looking at digital transformations, one of the key problems I face is how do you embed the language of CX in operations and build when the nature of the frameworks people apply talk about defects and enhancements? And sometimes when I've dealt with a digital transformation, some of these customer experience management changes, like, wouldn't it be good if we had text rules that made sure that everybody had the right rules around capitalization, so your screen flows don't look all over the place? Wouldn't it be a good idea if they did that? Sometimes the response back has been that's an enhancement, therefore we don't need to bother about it. So the language of product functionality, defects and enhancement kind of misses the point when you're dealing with customer experience, which by nature is a little bit more soft. So I kind of use this model, which is a default agile model, the Cynefin model, Cynefin. It's not my model, it's from Cognitive Edge, where they talk about, let's look first of all what we're talking about before we get into what we seek to measure, and then apply our measurements around that. So rather than talking defects and enhancements, we could be talking about something entirely different. We talk about culture. Well, actually, take the example again. We talk about content authorship. If we spoke about that capitalization as being an enhancement and we reject it, we'd miss the whole point that the failure of capitalization through the screen throws leads to me as a customer thinking this is an amateurish site, and we lose that seeking of understanding. So the model I apply is Cynefin. It basically talks and teaches the BAs around how to think about systems and the constraints within systems. So the best example of that is obvious things, like if I was in a theatre ward as a surgeon, swabs in, swabs out, very easy to sense, categorize and respond to those. Best practice applies. This is all the things about compliance rules and SLAs. We will do X in 12 weeks. More complicated areas are maybe 4 drop calls predict churn. We're applying big data analytics to understand what the best customer experience is against churn rates. And this requires more analytical skills to apply. We also understand customer experience in the complex space. I've mentioned about the example of capitalization. And in this chart, it's really about where things are going and understand where things are going. So in another example is looking and engaging in conversation as an account representative in the tarmac example to do consultative selling, to understand and look for upsell opportunities. It's not necessarily predictive beforehand, but you create the right environment to get that going, to triage the right insights. So that's the kind of framework I use, really on the basis that I want to get people away from thinking defect and enhancement around customer experience within the build. This also has implications, of course, in terms of measurement. I tend to see things like customer satisfaction more at that obvious space. Customer phones in the contact center, you are rude on the phone. They give you a 0 out of 10 on an NPS rating. There is a root cause effect. You go back, you close that off. It's very easy to understand the root cause and its relationship to the score. Understanding churn analytics models, you need data analysts, you need big data and a number of data sources to get to a predictive model for data analysts to get those to predict drop calls on churn. Complex models, you need your insights to work effectively, understand what the natural way customers would talk about the experience, and ideate and look for those opportunities. So I would temper my understanding of customer experience against an understanding of its prevailing constraints. Coming back to the point, what are you talking about? Apply the best metrics to what you're talking about. As I say, and that default agile framework. I think another thing in the culture space, so we've spoken about speaking the right language and getting the top leadership on board in digital, is coming back to those operational people. Customer experience in digital is not just about the screens, it's about the people who sit behind the screens, the claim handlers, and those who are engaging with your customers. They have a new and different role now to perform. So engaging operations of the change is a key thing. So the kind of things in Fordpass's case with their digital app that they were required to perform was a different role and function. So here, members curious about, with the Fordpass app, new functionality, people part of the membership of the app expecting to be spoken to differently, wanting to upsell and engage the membership in new functions and new levels of knowledge. And also they will look at you on the phone in Worley when they phone up as a knowledgeable expert on Ford. And if you're treating them transactionally as you were before, you're missing the whole point. Digital takes out linear processes and over-manualized processes to enable the operations to perform a different function with the customer. That's kind of the theory. In MIB's world, it's a different example. We are making the operators on the phone now make sure that people can understand legal text, can deal with vulnerable customers more effectively, which is a different role than performed before as a claims handler. So digital, again, coming to this point, is omni-channel. Omni-channel is simply a standard, straightforward customer experience management function. So digital is really, we talk about it, enabling an upgraded customer experience and how you as customer experience management can help and support that. So that's the culture side. Leading continuous improvement was, I mentioned some things also on this. Try to think of customer experience, try to define it first. What are you seeking to measure? What do you mean by customer experience? Then define the measure, apply. And I'm quite strong on this point because I've seen in the operator world, as soon as you say it's NPS, while that's not a bad measure, let me be clear on that, people get hung up on it. And soon you get charts being pushed out around the NPS, and soon you get driver analytics around the NPS, and it misses the whole point. Because Reichelt was never about NPS, it was about how movements in NPS relate to hard measures. Very few people focus on the movements. And when you do analyze any of these CSAT, NPS measures, the explanatory power is usually pretty limited. So what I say is seek to understand first what the experience is, you seek to change, and then measure it. If you hang yourself on a single score, while you will get some benefit, because we've seen before there is some root cause, you'll be leaving value on the table. And I think it's a dangerous game to hang yourself on a single measure. So the kind of measures I try to employ are looking through the use of apps to pick up narratives. So in the world of NHS, in NHS Wales, they use free-flowing narratives from care workers who went into socially disadvantaged homes to understand and alert, use it as an alert, when they themselves spotted a problem, for instance, the potential for maybe there's deprivation or child abuse that they were spotting, or potential for child abuse. They're using narrative as alerts within the triage function. Likewise with Boeing, using narratives, again, as a means to state more where the problems are, and more naturally what the narrative would be around what it is like to work within Boeing. And if you can take people away from evaluating the experience just to say, this is what I'd naturally say about my day job, I think you'll get a more natural response about some of the constraints that they're working on, because they have less fear of their boss looking over their shoulder and saying, what are you saying against our company potentially? Okay. So big fan of narratives. It's a whole subject in of itself, so I'm not necessarily going to go too much into that. But also we are looking at, coming back to the MIB world, how we can use huddles to pick up information. So how we embed the journey map in the discussion and the findings from our triaging and discussion with employees. And if you again use the funnel as your KPI, you said, we did, becomes very transparent to the organization. And these are just some other examples from Virgin that I picked up, and other examples from LV Insurance that are good examples of using innovation. So hopefully that's been useful. I think we've got 10 minutes to go. I can't see any of the questions at the moment, so I'll leave that by just after the summary, if I may. So what we have been through, I'll just see, because there is a chat example. So yeah, I just got one question I'll ask now before I get into the summary. Sensemaker framework similar to Cynefin. Okay, so Cynefin is the framework. So again, when you find people talking about we only focus on the ROI of customer experience because of root cause effect, just remember that you have this ongoingness, interactional quality of relationships, how people, you think about the consultative selling, you don't know beforehand what you're going to sell, as a different form of customer experience. So that's the Cynefin framework, understanding the constraints you have first to help knowing where you are as a business, which I used to get people away from thinking from text rules and capitalization with just a defect or an enhancement. Number one. Sensemaker is a framework that's a narrative, that's using narrative. It's a voice of the customer platform that supports that by picking up in that NHS Wales example, picking up free-flowing narrative from employees and also usable from customers, but also critically getting the employee or the customer to self-quantify it themselves, not an algorithm, because an algorithm presumes that what you say in your text is literally the word on the page and what you mean. And there is value of that, but also we use Sensemaker and have used it with Bharti Airtel to unpick what is sitting behind in the customer's mind about the experience they're delivering and the narrative they say. So Sensemaker, voice of the customer, Cynefin framework that can be used as an agile framework and to help define what the customer experience is that you're seeking to influence. So that gives just hopefully a little insight into where I see customer experience at the moment in the digital transformation world. In summary, I'm going to summarize it because there's a lot of data for you to take in, a lot of things I've thrown at you. You can see the sense of this as customer experience wherever you apply it. And digital has some certain challenges that need to be broached, particularly around language and understanding, because it's a functional build environment. But I think there is, in summary, I would say going into it, is the role of customer experience clear? Is your continuous improvement role well defined? Do people see you as kind of like the customer advocate? Do you have governance and compliance? Who owns the customer experience role? Or are you just free floating and not and looking to create your own business case, that I had seen in some organizations? Do you have leadership support? Is the language used adequate? Been through that. Avoid defects, enhancements. Are people using different language? Can we expose some of the team, for instance, and some of the customer insights work that we do, and some of the focus groups that we run? Are the POs, product owners, engaged in your triage? Do they have a good understanding of what customer experience is? Because typically they are the pinch point for making decisions, what goes in the build and what goes out of the build. And if they don't have a good understanding of customer experience supported by project management, whatever you do will fall by the wayside. Do your journey maps have utility? Does every business case have customer input? Remember the field engineering example I gave from Ericsson. Reporting on customer impacts helps your business case. Is insights process up to scratch? Mentioned that already. Avoid measurementitis. Build in qualitative reporting. Do you have budget? Is the clear and obvious way? And are your stakeholders engaged where necessary, particularly around operations? So that in a nutshell, hopefully gives you some insight, a lot there to take into play. But I think overall, I'd say the only guru of customer experience is the customer themselves. So to get close to the customer, be the customer's advocate, but also with humility, because it's always a negotiation with teams, because sometimes the customer and what we do for the customer is not right or does not fit with what we can do and the constraints we operate or even the KPIs we're shooting for. Sometimes it can just be about cost efficiency, but that does not mean to say customer experience cannot come into play. It has a very strong function within digital builds, within omni-channel transformation. It just needs to be more mature on the ground. And that's where I see the failure point has been so far in customer experience today. So with that, I'll finish because I think we've got 5 or 10 minutes. As I say, if there's any questions that follow on this, I know this is I'm sure it'll be recorded, just reach out to me. Very happy to give further elaboration on anything that I've said already. Okay, so a few questions now. So cognitive edge is the sense maker for us to refer some material. Again, I'm not on commission, by the way. I'm just going on best practice. And I wrote a book around some of the sense-making Cynefin frameworks. So I'm a bit of a fan, which can be a dangerous thing. But I do find hopefully the language moves you away from functional language and focusing on narrative adds that layer on. So I'd refer to, in looking at those, it's Cognitive Edge, and a guy called Dave Snowden, which is, and again, this is a default agile framework, so it does have great authority in the area that I work in. Yep, absolutely. Presentation, I think, is with Mohammed, so you'll have access to that. What's your take on employee experience metrics? Well, you know, I'm never a negative about any metric, whether you use CSAT or NPS. I've used NPS and am using NPS, for instance, as an example. There's cultural value in these things that makes it clear and apparent. But I will always say is go beyond that to look behind it and look, and don't just evaluate people, try and get that natural conversation. So my take on employee experience metric is sometimes you always have your boss on your shoulder when you apply these. And that example from Boeing, I didn't go into great detail about it, but the key KPI there was more stories like this, fewer stories like that. Sounds a little bit fluffy, a little bit, but really what it's trying to get to is how would you naturally describe your experience as an employee without biasing it, without leading it down the path of only going to say to you what my boss wants me to say. So you get your natural, more natural conversation, then you can use that as a fulcrum point for discussion about where we should derive our insights from that and understand where the problem points are. But people have to be aware when they respond that their boss isn't on their shoulder. So it's natural transparency is the problem with employee metrics. Employee metrics on the big data side, well, you know, I'm getting increasingly emails about my productivity, and that, which is probably about how many times I've been on my PC. So I think there is a risk around that. And I do think that we do need to be cautious about big data metrics for employees and not constraining people to a functional role. And so, but I think what's important again is exactly what I've said before. There's no good getting the metric if you don't understand what you're doing and showing you said we did and managing that through some form of triage. I'm very keen on being transparent with employees as I would customers. So empty assignment key I gave earlier from claims handlers, you said it was bad, it's affecting your job by what 5 minutes per day, we have done X. It's kind of like the thing where I want to get to. Because again, if people can see they're part of the experience they're designing, you get better traction. Who's leading the way in customer experience? Leading the way in customer experience, I think I've signposted leading authorities who are leading the way in terms of frameworks. I think there are co-creation economy is another one I'd looked at in that type of impression. I guess if you meant in terms of businesses, any organization in my definition that is customer sensitive and builds in that into continuous improvement is doing it for me. And I think that there are a number, I'm trying to avoid the classic ones like saying Marks and Spencer's and Starbucks and all the classic examples that you have within that. But those are the kind of ones that do actually try and keep ahead of the curve and at the curve with customers. And also to do a little bit different, Her Majesty's government in the UK, very good at their digital experience. Their rules, GDS rules, are taken as the key rules for designing great web-based omni-channel experiences. So I'd look for HMC, Her Majesty's government, some of the tax services, visa services, and so on and so forth. GDS solutions they provide as great examples of stellar best practice. And that is not one that focuses on loyalty per se, it focuses on other aspects of customer experience. So while loyalty is important for examples of high brands like Cadillac, there are other aspects of customer experience that also need to be input to play. And I think that it says, Mohammed said no time, so no hurry, Stephen, so you can take your time. So I think the patient experience, so I was rushing there because I was aware that we're nearly up to time. So if you've got a little bit of time, I'll witter on. In terms of patient experience, I think, I mentioned about the great opportunity in patient experience, which is not being delivered, I believe, to date with some of these key issues around clinical trials. Patient experience now, of course, with COVID is a very different world than the world that I was spoken to in the past. There's an awful lot I could say about patient experience based on governmental regulations, but I'll try and avoid any statement around that and keep it generic. I think some of the insights has been how do you get the patient on the ground to impact strategy and not just make it a top-level decision-making type organizational model that they work against. And I think the same way that I'm speaking about how you pull in insights from patients and how you co-create with patients applies. And there's a great example of that to illustrate the point. Not the one you did necessarily expect, but National Health Service in the UK, in their customer experience program, is all about co-designing with patients and employees. Can sometimes feel a little bit on the cheap, to be honest with you, but it's that customer empathy that they build into their model of customer experience and work with the trust hospitals to deliver that. I suppose it depends in terms of what clinical outcomes you're talking about. I think what experiences. So is patient satisfaction more important, for instance, than getting a treatment for your condition? I would say absolutely not. I think, it's, there's some, but again, I think it again depends where you're positioned as an organization. Some private trust hospitals in the UK, for instance, would absolutely depend on and measured to the hilt their satisfaction rates, because this is what they differentiate themselves as a business. In other organizations, you can feel there's less of a bind. It's more about managing the condition. But I think there's a balance between the two. So it's fine to say we will cure your condition, but if you have a 5-week delay on a motor or rotator cuff injury on your shoulder, which I have at the moment, while you're waiting for the doctor, the two bleed together. There's a pivot point between the two that has to be balanced. Again, it comes back to the point, hard metrics and soft metrics together, and understanding your position as an organization. Does co-designing increase complexity, and how's the impact getting into that? I think it depends what you're talking about. The complexity model that I was showing, or the Cynefin model I was showing, merely asks the question, what are you dealing with and where are you at the moment in dealing with it? So does co-designing increase complexity? If it was putting in place that we need a CRM system to manage, then absolutely. Then it becomes a question of reward for effort and how you manage complexity. I think if it's other areas about simpler things like compliance, as the example of swabs in and out, that becomes in the obvious space, and therefore it doesn't manage increased complexity. It's a simple compliance procedure. You could argue it may be complex getting the surgeons to agree to it, but in that space of what you do is fairly simple and straightforward. The other question was, how does that impact getting to the right outcome? Again, when you, going back to the point, tell us what the customer experience is, and I'll tell you what to measure. Swabs in, swabs out is in the obvious space. It's a simple thing to the compliance framework to execute. You should be able to measure it in traditional means. Getting to the right outcome in terms of a CRM system, say for instance, we're talking about, let's go back to the old world in terms of the getting the invoices in the right area. Again, I believe you can measure that through your big data analytics. Comes a little different in terms of the right outcome if you're looking at, for instance, patient-doctor engagement, or the example of NHS Wales, where they're looking at ongoingness, which is the definition of complex space, and how they go in and engage with social care. Then it comes down to, are we alerting when we see a problem with our children in social care, and are those alerts being taken into consideration when we do activity? So I think all these can be measured. They're just in different spaces with different outcomes, which again comes back to the point. Think about what you're doing, think of the constraints, and apply measures against that. Yeah, sorry, my country code is +44. I should have done that. I will put that in straight away. That's my bad. So let me just put this down, and you're just going to see a slightly smaller screen. So it's +44, and you drop the 0, and I'll put the 0 in there for you if you wish to have a further check. I recognize, some of these things need greater definition. You can only sometimes give a little bit of a waffly answer around KPIs, because if you don't know what you're dealing with, you don't know how to measure it. But hopefully it's just giving you directionally where to look and why customer experience is more than a singular score. Okay, I'm losing the chat again, Mohammed. I think, I don't know whether there's any more questions at this point. Pull my screen down. Here we go. Is it suggested to use co-designing, especially where it's not possible to use digital channels, maybe due to capability? Yeah, and we do. So paper-based applications is not possible due to nature of vulnerable customers not being able to go onto digital channels. And we do co-design, and we do that through UX research, which is essentially designing forms with the customer and taking insights on that. And it's a fairly lab-based environment with 8 customers for the design. So absolutely, I don't think it's exclusively applied to digital. What about self-proclaimed gurus on LinkedIn? Nobody's a guru about the customer. How about that? I think that everybody has a take. I'm not going to diss anybody. And I think that, I think you just have to make your own opinions in your business, whether that take is applicable or not. But I would again say some of the best gurus for customer experience lie outside the customer experience profession. And I don't mean that in a bad sense, but if, for instance, a lot of talk about emotion, there's a whole body of cognitive psychologists around emotion. Keith Oakley, for instance, Lisa Feldman-Barrett, for instance, who've written a book on emotion. Look to some of the other providers as well, because that's their day job and their profession. In this space, and as I said, in the agile space, there's a whole other set of leading authorities. So, but in customer experience, such a big profession, it helps to have that cut through, but I think ultimately, try to get away from traditional thinking is what I'd probably summarize that up as. Goodwill as a measure. Goodwill looks at a measure of who is high on goodwill to bring those into the mix when you're turning your insights into actionability. Identifying those as a segment is always absolutely a worthwhile activity. Those in terms of high engagement, and in fact, those in terms of low engagement. So I think what sits behind goodwill is energy towards your business, both positive and negative, are fundamental providers and sources of information for your design. So I would say goodwill is a good measure, but one of the metrics, not the only metrics. And Guru is also a customer. Absolutely, I totally agree with that. So I think I've answered all the questions on here as best as I can. We've been through a little bit around, it ended up going into a little bit of discussion on employees and co-designing. So hopefully that was useful for you. But again, co-designing employee, absolutely fundamental digital transformation, and how we iterate our designs through the agile framework, A/B testing, and how that fits within the operational design is critical.